Okay, so if we just looked at this poem without reading it,
Yeah.
it looks half-hearted, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And my guess is you don't like it.
No.
Okay. That's a good way in, though. Talk me through what's wrong.
What's wrong with the poem?
Yeah.
Well, it's very wishy-washy. I like to say wishy. There's no power in the poem. It's
okay. Yeah, the verb's always were, isn't it? It's not really an active verb at all.
No. As it says in the title, it's a praise song for her mother.
Yes.
If you were her mother, we'll discuss this, but you might like it, you might not, if you read into it that way. But I don't think anybody as an audience can find this that interesting.
Is it ultimately too personal a poem then?
I think so. Yes, and there's all of these poems are very personal.
Yes.
But the fact that this poem is entirely directed at her.
Yes.
There can be no generalisation. You can't pull anything from this and put it into the context of your life.
Yeah, she deliberately chooses examples here that are really specific to herself, and her mother. And so unless you've had that same childhood in, I can't remember what country she's come from.
It was in the Caribbean somewhere, I believe,
so unless you've had that Caribbean upbringing, actually the references don't chime with your experience of life.
Yes.
So she's obviously done that deliberately, though.
Yeah, well, I think it's purely directly at her mother. I think it's quite a narrow-minded poem.
Well, let me...
Or perhaps, if we read it in a perhaps negative fashion, which you can do.
Yes, you can, yeah.
Read it in negative fashion. That is the only way I see that she is doing perhaps a scathing poem on motherhood.
Oh, so she's attacking her mother? Well,
if she was to attack her mother, then you could take that as she's talking about all mothers, because if she is attacking her mother, the points that you get from it are quite general.
Go on then, show me how it's an attack on her mother.
Attack on her mother, okay. Well, we start to look at the three things, the three adjectives are pretty much all we can take as a bad thing to her mother. So deep and bold and fathoming. So on the surface, these are brilliant things.
Yes, they are.
But if we look, these are all very ambiguous words. They have different meanings.
Go for it.
Fathoming. It's someone that... It's water imagery again, but it's someone that understands that, like Sherlock Holmes, he was very fathoming. Perhaps she's saying she was always trying to work me out. She was always behind me. She's deep. She's very stern as a mother.
Okay, can I introduce a counter-argument here?
Yes, introduce it.
What if fathoming shows how fully her mother understood her, and deep reflects that? So she explained grace to Grace herself, if that makes sense.
I would completely take that. But then we look at this. She is pull.
Yes.
That's a very strange adjective to use. What do you think that would mean? But the real one that I like that ties in with this is the word mantling.
Yeah, go on.
A mantle, I do believe, is a coat, right? It's some kind of cloak.
Yeah, it's worn over your shoulders.
Worn over your shoulders. Over your shoulders, perhaps we can say, if we take this, she was always over her shoulder. We could take that in two ways. We could say she's always looking out for her.
Like an arm around the shoulders.
Like an arm around the shoulders. Or perhaps she's always looking over her shoulders.
Yeah, intrusive.
Intrusive.
And that fits with Moon's eye, always watching.
Always watching. Well, the Moon's eye is also imagery of a Caribbean god. Is the Caribbean goddess of the moon.
Okay.
Well, it's a more tidal imagery. Her mother was she obviously relates her mother to the Caribbean, to the sea.
Yes.
But the moon's, she's giving her mother godly power here.
Okay.
Her mother had godly power over her.
And are you suggesting that it's abused?
I think you could take it in one of two ways. It's either very positive,
or
quite negative a poem, until we get to
the ambiguity that you're finding here. You think is deliberate?
I think it's deliberate. Yes.
Okay. Talk me through
whether she is being literal with her ambiguity. Whether her mother was like this, or she's saying, I took what my mother was like in a positive light.
Right.
As we see on the surface, it's quite a positive poem.
Yes.
But what my mother could have been doing was a bad thing. Perhaps she is saying about the fine line in motherhood between being a terrible mother who's overprotective,
yes,
and the best mother that one can have.
So, if we take the water image here,
yes,
well, it runs all the way through.
Yeah.
Is she suggesting that we as readers need to look into the water's depths? Need to see the real mother underneath?
Yes. Well, it's all a lot of depth imagery in here. That you are the water to me, deep. This is a very deep and low down poem in a very dark place. The deeper the water is the darker it is. It's a very dark place. It's a place that we also don't know much about at all.
Yes.
And she would never have known much about, because in the Caribbean where she lived, they wouldn't have gone scuba diving.
Well, okay, no, that's probably true.
So perhaps her mother to her is quite a mysterious figure.
Yeah.
Quite a...
Okay, let's look at this verse here. So if we stick with your idea of it being critical, then we can pick on red.
Well, I'll let if we sneak up to the verse quickly. The most critical adjective, in my opinion, is this word rise.
Yeah.
If you rise, you're very angry at someone. You rise against
someone. You rise
someone.
up. Yeah. Okay.
It's a very angry, and perhaps it suggests she wanted to rise up against her mother to break through the chains.
Yeah.
She is sunrise to me. She's there every morning. We could take that again. Positive, like she is there looking after.
Yeah, I think on the surface you've argued that the first meaning is always a positive one, isn't it?
Yes.
So, the sunrise on your face in the morning is joyful experience.
Yeah.
But then that's deliberately contrasted with this aggression.
Yeah.
And streaming can be looked at in the same way.
Tears is your immediate connection.
Yeah, so not streaming with light, but with water.
Yeah.
Which picks up on the water imagery of the pull of the tide and the water here.
Well, I think if you read the poem, you read the adjectives without really understanding them.
Yeah.
Because you understand that this poem is full of Caribbean imagery.
Yes.
And you immediately say, well, I won't know some of the things that this poem is meaning. But, like, if you take this word streaming, you could say you are sunrise to me, rise and warm and streaming. You say, well, that's fine. But if you look at streaming, you take streaming as water, like the rest of the imagery in the poem, then that's perhaps your tears.
Well, it does fit a description of water much more than it fits light, doesn't
that's
it?
what I'm saying. That's why you read this poem and you think, well, streaming, it's just the way that she has written this poem.
So by this point in the poem, she's asking us to look beneath the surface and is pointing us towards a more unhappy relationship.
I think so.
Okay, take us through this one.
Okay. You were the fish's red gill to me. Well, red is your obvious imagery.
Yes.
She's becoming more and more obvious about what she thinks.
Yes.
And perhaps this progresses through her life. In the beginning, her mother was all she wanted. Her protection was amazing.
Yes.
When you're a young child, that's often the case.
Yeah.
But then she starts to rise. Perhaps she's become a teenager, and so often as they do, begin to rebel and begin to rise up against their parents, against their mother. The fish's red gill to me, it's very angry.
Yes, it is, yeah.
The flame tree, that's fire.
Anger is reflected again.
The crab's leg, it's a pincer, is a crab's leg. It's something that can...
hostile.
It's hostile, it's pain-causing. Hello.
I'm going to just say goodnight to you.
Okay.
Is that alright?
We'll keep that on our YouTube video.
Yeah, you interrupted us, but...
How exciting. Good luck. Night, people of YouTube.
Nobody's watching.
Right. So we've got the pincer and this kind of disembodied leg. It's also as though it's just been torn off.
Yeah. But then, weirdly, she's described everything else with the word and.
Yes.
And then suddenly here, she's gone for a dash.
Yes.
The fried plantain.
What do you make of that?
I think she's gone this, and then she said, well, actually, the fried plantain smell, it's very nice. It's very, very Caribbean. And I find it very difficult to take anything bad from the plantain smell, apart from your slavery imagery. That's
as in plantation.
Yeah. That's the only thing, and I think that's too weak. I think what she's actually saying is my mother perhaps was good to me at the start.
Yeah.
But she, with the same behaviour, I thought that was terrible. I thought that was bad. But in the end, the Caribbean and my mother were a brilliant thing.
Yeah. So if we look at the structure of this verse and the way replenishing is repeated and offset here on its own, have we got a kind of equation going on here? Although it looks like it's unbalanced, actually the forward slash here says that this balances everything else that's gone before. And ultimately this is how I see my mother.
Yeah, well, I'd like to take it like that. And then she adds this last line on.
Yeah.
Go to your wide futures, you said.
Yes.
Perhaps here she has said her mother was ultimately good and optimistic. Go to your wide futures, you said. It's almost sarcastic, isn't it?
Well, yeah, before we get to the sarcasm, so we've got this optimism where mother has moved away from pull and that umbilical cord, stay with me. And so despite everything, her mother has replenished her and told her to go, which we could see as the story of emigration, going to a wider world. Now, but then you're quite right, this could be read, you said, as entirely sarcastic, couldn't you?
Yeah.
So talk me through the sarcasm.
Well, if she was to be sarcastic, it would negate here, as we talked about earlier, she was weaning us in to this negative imagery.
Yes.
She, by saying you said, if that's sarcastic, she's negated all the positive imagery.
Yes.
She's saying, go to your wide futures, you said. Now look at the negativity.
Yeah.
That I've written
here. So is this Grace looking back and saying, actually, my future wasn't wide at all, it was narrow?
I've done this myself. It's like...
okay.
It's like, it's almost as if this is almost like she's credited her mother with her success. And then she said, go to your wide futures, you said.
Oh, right, like you didn't really mean it?
Yes.
But I've gone off and done it anyway.
Yeah, like she knew, the mother thought she knew that she didn't really have a wide future.
Yes.
She was just an immigrant from the Caribbean coming to the UK. And she's scathing her mother for being so pessimistic, not believing in her.
Okay. I hadn't read the poem that way at all, but let's go back to the title.
Yeah.
If it were entirely a positive poem, we could argue it would be titled Praise Song to My Mother.
Yeah.
Yeah? But for my mother suddenly implies there's a kind of a lesson here, or
yes. Well, interestingly, a praise song is in the Caribbean religions.
Yes.
It was often something they do at someone's funeral.
Okay.
They'd have written, and it's a song with a dance. Often,
right.
And they would sing it and dance it at the person's funeral. So it's almost like she's written this poem for her mother when she's dead.
Which ties in with the past tense, you were, okay.
Well, I don't think her mother's dead when she writes this poem.
Which suggests what about the relationship? Because you're saying culturally, anyone from her cultural background would read this as a eulogy to be said at a funeral.
Yes.
And so that's deliberate. She's treating her mother as though she's dead when everyone knows that her mother's still alive. So what can we infer about the relationship there?
Well, in the most extreme view, her mother's dead to her. In the complete... I don't think it's that extreme.
Yeah.
I think there's distance between her and her mother that she accredits to herself almost here. Because then she's saying how her mother was actually a good mother.
Okay.
In the beginning.
Right, I want to give you an alternative possibility here.
Yes.
That the mother here is actually the country she's come from. It's not her biological mother at all. And so it's her own country that she's left behind.
Yeah. So if we were to take all of the negativity she's saying about her country, well, if we're just to do it again quickly without her country, sunrise to me, rise and warm and streaming. If we're to take that as a negative, the sun in the Caribbean is incredibly hot.
Yes.
It can often be quite painful and cause death.
Nah, and that doesn't work with someone who's indigenous, though, does it?
Well, I'm not sure I don't like the possible imagery of a slave.
No, I don't think that works. Also, it's a French word.
Plantain.
Yeah. And it's a particular kind of small sweet banana.
Yeah.
And so we don't need to go. In fact, slavery doesn't match with replenishing, does it?
Can you think why it's dropped it off the edge here?
Well, I guess it signifies, look, this is my final word on the matter.
Yeah.
So each of these verses has been ambiguous, as you've shown, but ultimately the memories I have of my childhood home replenish me.
Yeah.
I have to keep coming back in my mind to the culture. And so here we might read this as not being sarcastic. She's been liberated to go to her wide futures.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, if we think this is for her country, if we take that as a point, and then the praise song, we know that's a eulogy.
Yes.
So why is she given a eulogy to her country, the Caribbean? Why is almost on the country's death she has written this?
Because you started saying that it was dead to her. In other words, she's now British. She's left that culture behind.
Yeah.
But it still lives with her, you know.
Okay.
But she doesn't tell us, does she? Whether it's the mother country or her actual mother.
Well, she's famous for writing poems about not fitting in the UK.
Yeah.
And her husband's from the Caribbean.
Yeah.
I think she writes a poem about someone in London, about a immigrant in London that doesn't feel right.
Yeah.
And that could, if we take that context and apply it to the rest of this poem.
So in that way, the you said is sarcastic to herself.
Yeah.
She is looking at her British existence and thinking, God, is that all it was?
Yeah.
That's miserable.
This is how much I've left behind.
Okay, well done.